I want to take you back to a very specific mindset today.
Okay.
It's 1951. The Soviet Union has the bomb. The Korean Peninsula is on fire.
Mm-hmm.
And in Washington, the defense strategy is really shifting from this idea of fighting over there to defending right here.
Yeah, the Atlantic Ocean isn't a moat anymore.
Exactly.
A fear is the polar route. Soviet bombers coming right over the Arctic Circle. The threat is suddenly very, very local.
So the U.S. government has a math problem on its hands.
It's a huge one.
They have the Air Force, sure, but they can't exactly put a radar station on every single roof in America. They can't patrol every bridge. They have a gap.
A massive gap. And to fill it, they didn't draft more soldiers.
No.
They turned to a group that I think is often totally misunderstood in the history books.
The citizen airmen?
Right, the Citizen Airmen.
Oh.
Today we are looking at the 1951 annual report of the Civil Air Patrol.
And if you think this is just, a club for hobby pilots.
Oh, this document proves you completely wrong.
Yeah.
This is literally the blueprint for how you turn the local baker and the high school math teacher into a paramilitary asset.
The stack of papers we're diving into today, the financial statements, the mission logs, it's the organization's 10th anniversary year. And our mission for this deep dive is to figure out how this volunteer auxiliary organized itself into a massive national asset. Because honestly, reading through it, it feels like a manual on how to do a lot with absolutely nothing.
That is the defining theme. It's a story of massive ambition colliding with the really harsh reality of being a volunteer force.
Yeah.
You have these heroic pilots saving people from floods. You have international diplomacy involving teenagers. And then right alongside it, the agonizing struggle to just get enough gas money to keep the planes flying.
Let's start with the scale of this thing. I think people hear Civil Air Patrol and they picture maybe a few hundred guys in leather jackets.
Right, a flying club.
But the report opens with some staggering numbers.
It does. The total membership listed for 1951 is 77,412. That is a significant force. You have 52 wings. That covers all 48 states, plus D.C., Alaska, Hawaii, and Puerto Rico.
So it's huge. But here's where I actually got a bit confused reading the membership section.
Oh, the purge.
Yes, because 1951 is peak Cold War anxiety. You'd think they would be trying to recruit every single person with a pulse. But the report says they actually shrank the adult membership.
It caught my eye, too. It's totally counterintuitive.
Right.
But 1951 is the year the CAP decided to essentially cannibalize itself. They initiated this sweeping purge of their own ranks.
Sweeping is a good word for it. They cut nearly 8,000 senior members, the adults, in a single year. They dropped from about 42,000 to 34,000.
Right. And you're in the middle of a war scare. You're trying to build a civil defense network.
Why would you cut 20% of your workforce?
You'd think you want every warm body you can get. But the report is really brutal about this. It essentially calls them paper tigers. The leadership realized that having 100,000 people on a list means absolutely nothing if only 10,000 show up when the siren wails.
So it's a major shift from just counting membership to demanding readiness.
Exactly. It's the difference between a social club and a functional militia. They kicked out the inactive reservists so they could look the Air Force in the eye and say, this is our effective strength.
They wanted a force representing personnel strength in readiness, which really implies that the Air Force was starting to rely on them for actual operational work, not just morale.
Precisely. But here is the tension. The Air Force wants them to be professional, ready, and capable. But the CIP is a benevolent, non-profit corporation.
Meaning they are broke.
Meaning they are completely broke. They rely on member dues and random donations.
I caught one detail in the financial section that I actually had to read twice.
The fuel.
Yes. The Air Force provided fuel and oil, but only for actual authorized search missions.
Right.
So if I'm a volunteer pilot and I want to practice flying search patterns, which is not easy flying, by the way.
No, low and slow. Very dangerous.
Who pays for the gas for that practice?
You do. You pay entirely out of pocket.
That is wild dedication to me. You are paying to practice a job that you aren't getting paid to do. You're risking your own aircraft just so you're ready if the phone rings.
And risking your life. I mean, search and rescue isn't like flying a commercial airliner. You're often in terrible weather. You're looking down at the ground instead of at the horizon.
Yeah.
But that investment from the members really paid off. When you look at the operations section, the return on investment for the country was massive.
Oh, absolutely. The report lists 95 actual search missions in 1951. They flew over 9,000 hours just looking for lost people or downed aircraft. But the centerpiece of the year, the event that really seemed to define their operational capability in 51, was the Midwest floods.
July 1951, Kansas and Missouri. It was an absolute disaster. The report actually calls it the hammers of floodwater.
Which is a terrifying image.
It is.
And amidst all that devastation, there is one specific story in here that feels like it belongs in a Hollywood movie. It involves a CIP pilot named Alfred Bates.
This is such a remarkable account. It really anchors the narrative of the whole report for me.
So, set the mean for us. Bates is in a light aircraft, probably a Piper or maybe a Taylorcraft flying near Wyandotte, Oklahoma.
Right. And the weather is terrible.
He looks down at the Neosho River Bridge and sees it's just packed with civilians. They're standing there on the bridge, watching the water rise, totally mesmerized by the flood.
And from the air, Bates can see what they can't.
Yeah.
The structural supports of the bridge are being hammered by heavy debris. The bridge is physically vibrating. He knows it's seconds away from failure.
But Bates has no siren. He has no radio link to the ground, which is a whole other issue we need to discuss in a minute.
Right.
He is completely isolated in that tiny cockpit. So he makes a choice.
He drops the nose of the plane.
He dives right at the crowd. He's flying dangerously low, fishtailing the plane, wagging his wings frantically.
Now, in aviation, wagging your wings is the universal signal for acknowledge or danger. But to the people on the bridge, it probably just looked like a madman trying to crash into them.
But it worked. It broke the trance. He scattered. They ran off the bridge. And the report says, and this really gave me chills reading it, the last person had barely reached solid land when the entire bridge crashed down into the stream.
Unbelievable. If he hadn't been there, if he hadn't been willing to risk his own airframe to buzz that crowd, that is a mass casualty event. Pure and simple.
Definitely.
And that is the citizen airman concept in a nutshell. A local electrician, because that's what Alfred Bates was, an electrician from Muskogee, using his own skill and his own plane to protect his neighbors.
That story is incredible. But, you know, it also makes me angry.
Because of the radio issue.
Exactly. Because you mentioned Bates likely didn't have a radio to warn them. He had to physically dive his airplane at them.
He had no way to talk to the people on the ground. And this is where the report takes a really sharp turn from this heroic, action-packed narrative into a complete bureaucratic nightmare.
The material section.
It is a manifesto of pure frustration. You have these pilots flying their hearts out, saving lives in Kansas and Missouri.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, the Air Force literally has warehouses full of surplus World War II radios. They're just sitting there, gathering dust.
It seems so logical that the Air Force would just hand the surplus gear over to the CAP, right? Like, here, take these radios. We aren't using them anymore.
Enter Public Law 152. This is the real villain of the 1951 report. The law stated that the military couldn't just give equipment to the CAP. They had to officially declare it surplus to federal needs first.
Which implies going through the entire Department of Defense disposal process.
Exactly. The Secretary of Defense himself had to sign off on it. So while the floodwaters are rising and bridges are collapsing, the radios that could coordinate the rescue are locked behind a legal firewall.
That is maddening.
The report explicitly complains about this. It says this red tape actually denied CAP the use of valuable surplus radio material that was just standing idle during a national emergency.
It perfectly highlights the tension between the spirit of the volunteer and the letter of the law. They had the people, they had the will, but the lawyers kept the radios locked up.
It's a classic case of policy lagging way behind reality. But despite all that, they still managed to build something really impressive because the communications section claims they had the largest radio network in the world.
Or at least one of the largest. Over 9,000 stations.
Right.
But the big shift in 1951 wasn't just the sheer number of stations, it was where they were located. The report calls it a move out of the attics and onto wheels.
Out of the attics. I love that phrasing.
Prior to 51, a lot of TIP radio operators were just guys sitting in their houses with a ham radio set up in the attic. Stationary. Helpful, sure, but stuck in one place.
But if a nuclear bomb drops or a major flood hits, you need to be able to move.
Exactly.
So the big push in 1951 was for mobile communications, installing rigs and jeeps, trucks, personal cars. This ties right back into that Cold War anxiety. They weren't just practicing looking for lost hikers anymore. They were actively simulating World War III.
They really were. The report details these strike missions that were flown for the Ground Observer Corps.
The GOC. Those were the civilian volunteers with binoculars standing on rooftops, right?
Yes. We tend to forget that radar in 1951 was far from perfect. It had massive blind spots. It couldn't see low-flying planes easily.
Right, the technology just wasn't there yet.
So they needed human eyes scanning the skies? CAP would actually fly their own planes low to the ground to simulate enemy Soviet bombers, just to test the civilian spotters.
There's one example in the report of a 7-state air raid alert.
7 states.
7 states. It involves 700 aircraft and 25,000 volunteer spotters.
That is massive.
Just imagine the logistical coordination required for that in 1951. It was a huge stress test of the national defense grid, and it was run almost entirely by volunteers.
It's incredible, and a huge part of this volunteer force, which is another fascinating angle, wasn't even old enough to vote. We have to talk about the cadet program.
The cadets, this is really where the CAP was building its future. The growth here was just explosive. They recorded a net increase of over 14,000 cadets in a single year.
And reading through the cadet section, it's very clear this wasn't just a Boy Scout troop meant to keep kids off the street. This was a direct pipeline.
Explicitly so. They were sending these kids to summer encampments at active Air Force bases. And this wasn't summer camp with s'mores and campfires.
No.
At Robbins Air Force Base, for example, the report notes cadets were learning radar operation, firefighting, marksmanship, and actual aircraft maintenance.
It's hardcore pre-military training.
It absolutely is. The Air Force saw this as a strategic necessity. If you can get a kid hooked on aviation and military discipline at 15, you have a much, much better recruit when they turn 18.
But there was also a softer, more diplomatic side to the cadet program that I found really interesting, the international exchange.
Yes, the IACE. In 1951, they swapped 110 cadets with 15 different nations. They had kids going to Sweden, Switzerland, Portugal, Brazil.
I really love the quote from General Spaatz in this section. General Carl Spaatz, he's the chairman of the KP board, former Air Force chief of staff, a total legend in aviation.
Oh, absolutely.
He said, if young men all over the world could only get to know each other, there would be no future wars.
It's a really beautiful sentiment, especially coming from a man who had orchestrated massive, devastating bombing campaigns in World War II.
Right.
He knew the awful cost of war better than almost anyone. So for him, it was about building this international brotherhood of air-minded youth.
And they brought in some serious star power to sell the program. The report casually mentions that Major Charles E. Yeager, Chuck Yeager, the guy who broke the sound barrier, helped select the International Airman Award winners.
That is a huge deal for a teenager in 1951, meeting Chuck Yeager. That's like a kid meeting a famous astronaut today.
Maybe even bigger.
Definitely bigger. And speaking of international competition, we can't skip the drill team. The battle for the General Lucas V. Bowe Trophy.
Yes, the big international rivalry.
Apparently, the U.S. team, which was drawn from the New York wing that year, had lost the trophy previously to Canada or Great Britain. They had. It was a sore spot. But in 1951, the New York team won it back. The report calls it a moment of pride in perfection.
I love that phrase.
It shows that this organization wasn't just about flying planes. It was about discipline, precision, and national honor.
So we've got the volunteer pilots, the radio operators, the teenagers in the cadet program. But the report also highlights some specific demographics within the personnel that really stood out. First off, women in the CAP.
This is a highly significant demographic. 13,000 women and girls were involved in 1951, and I think it's really important to note they weren't just in administrative roles making coffee.
Not at all. I was reading the profile of Colonel Frances W. Nold. She headed the women's program for the patrol.
A very serious veteran pilot.
Yeah, the report mentions she flew a Crimson Ryan Navian, which is just a very cool, vivid image, and she had logged 4,500 flight hours.
Wow.
That is a serious aviator by any standard.
And the report also notes that the family dynamic was quite unique to the CAP. You had these mother-daughter teams serving together.
Oh, that's right.
It reinforced that whole community aspect. It wasn't just a weekend job. It was a lifestyle for these families.
The other group that saw massive growth in the personnel section was the chaplaincy. That number really jumped out at me, too.
It's fascinating. They went from 84 chaplains to 350 in just 1 year. That is a massive percentage increase.
Why the sudden push for chaplains, though? Was there a specific reason?
I think it goes right back to the cadets. They held their first national conference at Bolling Air Force Base that year, and the report specifically notes they represented Protestant, Catholic, and Jewish faiths.
In 1951, having that kind of formalized interfaith cooperation in a paramilitary organization is pretty notable.
It really reflects their total care approach. They weren't just training these teenagers to fix engines and shoot rifles. They were providing spiritual guidance, especially during those summer encampments when they were away from home. Parents wanted to know their kids were being looked after morally, not just physically.
It's total sense. Okay, we've talked about the people and the missions, but we need to circle back to the actual hardware. We mentioned the red tape with the radios. But what about the airplanes? You mentioned earlier that members often flew their own planes.
Yes. The fleet was largely privately owned by the members themselves. Now, the Air Force did provide some aircraft, specifically the L-13,
Right.
but there is a little detail hidden in the report that is both funny and honestly kind of sad.
Oh, I saw this, the non-flying condition note.
Exactly. The Air Force donated 38 of these L-13 aircraft to the CAP, but the report quietly notes they were all received in non-flying condition and were used solely for ground training.
So it's like, here's an airplane, kids, but don't try to fly it because it doesn't actually work.
Pretty much. It highlights that core struggle again. The CIP was an official auxiliary of the most powerful Air Force in the world, yet they were constantly working with broken hand-me-downs.
And that lack of proper resources brings us to a much more somber reality in the report. This wasn't just a fun, safe hobby. People actually died doing this.
They did. The report notes that 53 members had been killed during World War II, and more had been injured or killed since hostilities ended.
And because they were volunteers, technically civilians, if they crashed and died while out searching for a lost child or a downed pilot, their families didn't necessarily get the same death benefits a regular soldier would.
That was a major legislative fight in 1951. There was a bill pending in Congress, H.R. 6331. The whole goal of the bill was to extend the Federal Employees Compensation Act to CIAP members.
And they put a very specific dollar value on the risk they were taking.
They did. The proposal was to officially value their volunteer service at a monthly wage base of $300 for the purpose of injury or death compensation.
$300 a month. I mean, it doesn't sound like much to us now, but in 1951, that was a real recognition that this work had economic value and severe risk.
It was an attempt by the government to legitimize their sacrifice, to say, you are not just a hobbyist, you are a federal asset and we owe you protection. Because frankly, if you die saving a bridge full of people in Oklahoma, the government should have your back.
Exactly. So when you look at this whole report, this snapshot of their 10th anniversary year, what is the big takeaway for you? We have this wild mix of floods, air raid drills, teenage diplomats, and boring legislative battles.
For me, it captures a very specific, fleeting moment in American history where the line between civilian and defense was incredibly blurry.
Yeah.
Today, we tend to think of national security as something the government does for us.
Right. The professionals handle it. We just watch it happen on the news.
Exactly. But in 1951, the philosophy was entirely different. The philosophy was that the community itself was the defense. If a bomber comes over the pole, it's the local baker watching through binoculars who spots it first. If a flood hits, it's the local electrician in his Piper Cub who saves the bridge.
It's the volunteer spirit deployed as an actual military strategy.
Precisely. It turns the entire population into a potential strategic asset. It's messy, it's incredibly hard to organize, and as we saw with the surplus radios, the bureaucracy often gets in its own way. But when it works, like with Alfred Bates over the Neosho River, it is incredibly effective.
It really makes you think about the definition of service. You don't always have to wear a military uniform to serve your country. Sometimes you just need to be willing to fly your own little plane into a storm.
And pay for your own gas.
And pay for your own gas. That really is the kicker.
It really is.
So here's the question we want to leave you with today. We are living in a completely different world now. The threats aren't necessarily Soviet bombers coming over the Arctic Circle anymore. They are cyber attacks, misinformation campaigns, drone warfare.
A whole landscape has completely changed.
So what does the 1951 version of a citizen airman look like today? Who are the volunteers out there wagging their wings at the bridge in the 21st century?
It forces you to completely rethink what defense looks like. Because I don't see people buying Cessnas to go patrol the border on weekends.
Not in the physical sky, maybe? But look at modern conflicts. Look at cyber warfare. The new Civil Air Patrol isn't flying planes. It's the OSINT Community Open Source Intelligence.
Oh, that's a great parallel. It's civilians using satellite data to track troop movements on Twitter. It's independent hackers patching vulnerabilities in municipal power grids before they get hit.
The domain has changed from the sky to the internet, but the core citizen auxiliary concept is arguably more relevant now than it ever was in 1951.
And just like in 1951, the government still hasn't totally figured out how to integrate those civilian experts without strangling them in red tape.
Some things really never change. It's definitely something for you to mull over. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into 1951. We'll catch you on the next one.
Stay safe out there.